What is an ill-trained North Korean soldier to do when they come up against the might of Ukraine's army? The North Korean soldiers who've landed in Ukraine are wholly unprepared for what war really means, and they're afraid for their lives. In this video, we're going to explore what's happening with those soldiers in terms of how they've been trained, what they're doing on the front lines, and how they're responding to fighting against Ukraine. But first, a question. What on earth are North Korean soldiers doing fighting against Ukraine in the first place? When Russian President Vladimir Putin launched his special military operation in February 2022, it was supposed to deliver a quick and clear victory. Russia would march on Kiev in a matter of days, taking the city before claiming Ukraine as part of the Russian Federation. It was supposed to be an extension of Putin's successful annexation of Crimea back in 2014, only the special military operation didn't go to plan. Ukraine fought back hard, and with the support of a host of military partners in the West, it's managed to drag what should have been a quick invasion out into a nearly 3-year-long war of attrition. Russia has lost tremendously during this war. Ukraine claims that 729,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or injured during the conflict so far, with Russia's equipment losses also being colossal. Over 20,000 artillery systems are gone. Russia has lost over 9,000 tanks and around 19,000 armored vehicles. Putin's operation has turned out to be a massive drain, not only on Russia's military, but on the very people that Putin has called on to help him win his ill-thought-out war. That's where North Korea comes into the picture. On June 19, 2024, Putin met with North Korean President Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang to discuss matters of military strategy. The duo emerged from their discussion having created a cooperative defense pact that obliged each nation to come to the military assistance of the other if either faced aggression. That assistance would come in the form of all means necessary, opening the door for North Korea to send weapons and soldiers to Russia if it were ever attacked on its own territory. The pact was extremely well timed. Just 2 months after it was created, Ukraine launched an invasion into the Russian oblast of Kursk. That gave Putin all of the excuse he needed to call on his new defensive partners to provide troops. President Kim delivered. On November 4th, the U.S. Department of Defense released a bulletin reporting on Air Force Major General Pat Ryder's comments that official estimates state that between 11,000 and 12,000 North Koreans had touched down in Russia. Those troops would become legitimate military targets if the report turned out to be true, Ryder said. They are absolutely true, and Russia wasted little time in putting its new North Korean soldiers to use. As we speak, it's believed that most of the North Koreans who arrived in Russia are taking part in the 50,000-soldier counteroffensive Putin has launched against Ukraine in Kursk. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky confirmed the reports, writing the following on X. Currently, there are already 11,000 North Koreans stationed in the Kursk region. He went on to decry the lack of a response from his Western partners, noting that there have been no increase despite Russia's escalation. Putin's goal with all of this is clear. Use the North Koreans to take back territory that Ukraine snatched out from under his nose. The problem for Russia is that North Korea's soldiers aren't up to the job. They're terrified of what they'll face in Kursk, and they want nothing more than to run away from the fight against Ukraine. There were some early signs that Putin's grand North Korean soldier plan wasn't going to work out for him. His desperate act to shore up his numbers in Kursk would require integrating soldiers from a different country who don't even speak Russian into his military. Videos started to emerge. One shared by CNN appeared to show North Korean soldiers arriving at a Russian military base to receive uniforms and equipment as they prepared for further training. Dozens of North Koreans lined up to get their gear, but it's footage of what came after that would have been worrying for Putin. None of his new soldiers knew a lick of Russian. On November 13th, Stuff shared a video of Russian troops providing their new North Korean comrades with some basic battlefield training. It shows the North Korean soldiers being shown how to lay landmines by their Russian superiors. Only there's one problem. The training gets interrupted when it becomes clear that the North Korean soldiers have no idea what they're supposed to be doing. The session devolves into an ad hoc Russian language lesson, with one of the North Koreans resorting to pointing at a sheet to ask his trainer how to pronounce a word. Slavo, stammers the North Korean soldier in an attempt to pronounce the Russian word for gently. Slavo, comes the trainer's response before the clip ends. They're only 20 seconds long. The video showcases just how difficult it is for the North Korean soldiers to work alongside their new Russian comrades. They clearly haven't been taught any Russian, and in the case of this landmine training, not knowing the Russian word for gently could have explosive consequences. The video also highlights problems that NBC News claimed the North Korean troops would have on November 16th. Language barriers combined with inexperience would be issues, and worse yet for the Russian soldiers working with these new troops, that combination could damage any chance they have of completing operations successfully. Speaking to CNN, former U.S. National Intelligence Officer for North Korea, Sidney Sila, laid the problem out. The average Russian soldier is going to say, "What are you doing here? I'm having to hold their hand. I'm tripping over their bodies." What does any of this have to do with North Koreans being terrified of Ukraine? Imagine you're a North Korean soldier. You've trained your entire career under one regime with all your knowledge revolving around how that regime fights. Suddenly you're plucked out of the military you've always known and placed into a completely different army. You don't know the language, you haven't been taught how to use the weapons that the new army uses, and you have less than a month to learn before you're forced onto the front lines to face battle-hardened Ukrainians who know exactly how to kill you. As funny as it may be to watch North Koreans struggling to learn Russian and fumbling over landmines, these types of breakdowns in communication are going to be common within Putin's Kursk counteroffensive. And they'll reveal what North Korean soldiers are really there to do: act as cannon fodder to soak up Ukrainian ammunition so that the Russian troops have a better chance of taking Kursk. That's terrifying for any North Korean soldier. Each soldier will know that they're poorly trained and nowhere near ready to take on the task at hand. And that should be an early sign to Putin that his new soldiers aren't going to do the job he needs from them. Another sign comes in something that's less a signal that North Korean troops are terrified of Ukraine, and more a showcase of how sheltered these soldiers are in their home country. Now they're in Russia. These North Koreans are getting access to a form of internet that is far less restricted than they experience at home. Assuming they had internet at all, they're taking full advantage of it. November 7th saw reports emerge that many of the North Koreans preparing to fight Ukraine in Kursk have instead started to gorge themselves on adult entertainment. Journalist Gideon Rockman recently posted the following statement on his X account. "A usually reliable source tells me that the North Korean soldiers who have deployed to Russia have never had unfettered access to the internet before. As a result, they are gorging on pornography." A few days later, a video emerged on social media of a North Korean soldier doing almost exactly that. The video shows the soldier lying in bed with a sly smile on his face as he watches something on his phone. The soldier then turns onto his stomach, at which point it's revealed that he's watching clips of dancing women. As soon as he becomes aware that there's somebody else in the room with him, he quickly switches onto his back and tries to hide his phone from view. The video is unverified at the time of writing this script, but it appears to support Rockman's claims that the North Korean soldiers are taking advantage of a new freedom they likely never expected to have. But again, the question is obvious. What does this have to do with being terrified of Ukraine? It's a demonstration of just how sheltered the lives of these North Korean soldiers have been so far. That sheltering is humorous in the context of soldiers watching videos of dancing girls on their phones. Sure, but such clips also hint at soldiers who've never had any experience of the world outside of North Korea. They've never been to war. They've never actively fought against people who are trying to kill them. The very same sheltered existence that leads them to gaze at adult entertainment on their smartphones is the very existence that leaves them wholly unprepared for a real fight. They've never been trained for anything outside of doing what Kim Jong-un tells them to do, and that inexperience of the world and the war they're entering is now starting to show on the battlefield. All the little signs of unpreparedness we've talked about so far may have a tinge of humor to them, but nobody in the 1,000-strong contingent of North Korean soldiers will be laughing about what happened when Ukrainian forces met North Korean soldiers on the battlefield in Kursk for the first time. Ukraine absolutely annihilated the North Korean soldiers on November 8th. Business Insider received details from a Ukrainian official about the first recorded clash between Ukraine and its new North Korean enemy on the front lines in Kursk. That Ukrainian official Andrei Kovalenko said the first North Korean troops have already come under fire in Kursk Oblast. His comments were later confirmed by Rustem Amirov, Ukraine's defense minister, who called the incident a small engagement, albeit one that ended very badly for the North Koreans. Continuing his description, Kovalenko noted that reconnaissance carried out by Ukrainian troops led to the discovery of North Korean soldiers wearing Russian army uniforms scattered across several units. All appeared to be taking part in training under combat conditions. An artillery strike was launched against a position where Russians and North Korean military personnel were located, said Kovalenko, in what he claims was far from an isolated incident. Of course, shelling of the positions occurs daily, he pointed out, suggesting that far more North Koreans have been caught in the crosshairs of Ukrainian artillery since this first engagement. Pay attention to what Kovalenko said about the North Korean troops. They were near the front lines to take part in training, likely exercises similar to those seen in the landmine training video we discussed earlier. As far as those North Koreans would have known, they were training in relative safety without Ukraine knowing where they were. The arrival of artillery shells on their position would have quickly proven them wrong, showcasing how the few weeks of training that Kovalenko claims they're receiving is nowhere near enough to save them from Ukrainian firepower. That's why North Korea is so terrified of Ukraine that its soldiers already want to go home. The first engagement shows them that they can be hit anytime and anywhere by an enemy that they can't even see. And to make matters worse, a former member of North Korea's Storm Corps, which is the supposedly elite group of soldiers President Kim has sent to Russia, says that his former comrades will be little more than cannon fodder for Ukraine. Speaking to Radio Free Europe, or RFE, via telephone, 39-year-old Hyun-Sung Lee says that North Korean soldiers will have seen nothing like the war zone they're entering in Kursk before, and he would know. Lee served in a North Korean artillery and reconnaissance battalion for over 3 years, which included 6 months spent training with the Storm Corps. They have never engaged in major conflict, Lee said of his former comrades when speaking to RFE. They don't have any real battle experience. Lee offered some insight into the scant training that North Korean soldiers receive in their home country. Equipment is always a problem for those soldiers, he claims. North Koreans don't really know how to use that equipment when referring to the night vision and thermal imaging devices Russia is reported to have furnished its new soldiers with. In other words, North Korean soldiers have no idea how to use the equipment Russia is giving them. This casts the video of the soldiers trying to figure out how to use landmines in a brand new light. And according to Lee, the basic training those North Korean soldiers are receiving in Russia will turn them into deer in the headlights. They'll become vulnerable to being easily defeated or killed, lending further credence to the idea that Putin intends to use these terrified North Korean soldiers as cannon fodder for his meat grinder. It's so bad for North Korean soldiers that some Ukrainian officials suggest they're likely to suffer a casualty rate of up to 90%. If 12,000 North Korean soldiers have truly arrived in Russia, that means 10,800 of them are either never making it back home or will go home with horrific injuries, Lee says. I would say that could be an accurate assessment when presented with a 90% figure. The North Korean soldiers are not well trained and it's a very unfamiliar environment for them. Most have never been on foreign soil before, and they certainly haven't had to deal with a slew of missiles and drones that they're going to face when fighting against Ukraine in Putin's Kursk counteroffensive. To punctuate his point, Lee says that North Korea last sent soldiers to fight abroad during the Vietnam War. That was over half a century ago. Here's something you may not have anticipated. Do you remember the funny little story about the North Korean soldiers taking full advantage of unfettered internet access to watch adult entertainment? What happens if some of those soldiers start coming across information like what Lee offers to RFE? What would they think if they find out that military experts are saying that only 1 out of every 10 of them has a chance of leaving the Ukraine war unscathed? That sort of information will only add to the fears they're already feeling. They don't know how to use the equipment Russia has given them. They can barely communicate with their new comrades, which means coordinating on the battlefield will be incredibly difficult. And as Ukraine showed during its first artillery strike against North Korean soldiers, the enemy can hurt these soldiers when they least expect it. The North Koreans have never faced anything like what they're stepping into in Kursk. It gets even worse for these soldiers. South Korea suggests that Russia is likely to pay each North Korean soldier $2,000 per month for their service. That seems like a major boon in a country where labor laws stipulate that workers must be paid a minimum of $50 per month. These North Korean soldiers might have thought that they were walking into a gold mine if they could make it through Kursk alive, but that isn't the case either. They won't be compensated, Lee tells RFE. Their parents and family won't be compensated either, claims the former soldier, as he points out that most of the money North Korean troops would have earned will end up in the state's pocket. So the North Korean soldiers don't only have to face up to the prospect that they're trying to fight with unfamiliar equipment in a foreign country against an enemy that's more than capable of killing 90% of them, they also don't even have the chance to make better lives for themselves on the back end. Those who survive will go back to the same lives they've always led, while watching their leader get richer thanks to this new influx of Russian money. That situation will do terrible things for North Korean morale. Add on to all of this the propaganda Ukraine has been sending the soldiers' way. Messages to flee before they are killed are being piped in thick and fast to the North Korean soldiers. Kim believes that many North Koreans in Kursk are going to weigh up their options and come to a simple conclusion: they need to defect. The former soldier believes it's highly likely that many of the North Korean soldiers will defect rather than face the rage of the Ukrainian war machine. And he's been proven right. Desertions have already started happening as Putin launches his counteroffensive. The Kiev Independent ran a story on an October report by Sir Spilner that suggested that 18 North Korean soldiers had deserted their posts in the Kursk-Bryansk oblasts. The soldiers were apparently stationed within 4 miles of the Ukrainian border. With the motives behind the desertions being unclear, if what we've talked about so far is anything to go by, we can conclude that abject terror lay behind each soldier's decision. The Kiev Independent says that the Russian commanders attempted to conceal the desertions from their higher-ups, suggesting that the news will be exceptionally embarrassing for Putin and Kim. South Korean news outlet the Hankura offered more details in an October 22 report. It claims that the North Korean soldiers were simply left in a forest without food or instructions from their Russian commanders for days on end, on the verge of starving while facing up to the prospect of fighting Ukraine. They ran in the hope that they could survive. The outlet also claims that the North Korean soldiers were tracked down several days after deserting, having made it over 37 miles away from their original stations. We don't know what happened to them after being captured. However, on October 24th, a Business Insider report may offer some hints. It claims that any North Koreans who have been sent to Russia will face harsh measures if they attempt to run away. North Korean defense expert Joseph S. Bermudez Jr., who works for the Center for International and Strategic Studies, claims that North Korea will already have these soldiers on a tight leash. That includes constant oversight by officials from the Working Party of Korea, who will file reports on everybody back to the ruling party back home. Are they drinking too much? Are they trying to acquire goods that they can't get in North Korea and send them home? These are all things the officials will look out for, claims Bermudez. And there are even harsher measures in place for would-be deserters. North Korean specialist at RAND Bruce W. Bennett says North Korea believes in generational punishment. When the country sends diplomats and similar professionals overseas, they're seldom allowed to bring all of their family with them. It's very typical for the Kims to insist that at least one member of any family operating overseas remain in Pyongyang as a hostage. Think about what that means for the North Koreans in Russia right now. They've been sent to a foreign country without any of their family to support them, and they know that those they have back home are under constant surveillance. One wrong move, one slip-up, could be enough to cause the authorities to punish the people they love the most. And that only shows us how desperate the North Korean deserters are. So terrified are they of what they face in their fight against Ukraine that they're willing to flee regardless of what happens to their families back home. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Either fight and likely die as Putin throws them at Ukrainian fortifications in Kursk with barely any training and no understanding of the weapons they'll face. Or they run, condemning their families on the one-off chance they'll be able to escape the fate that awaits them in Kursk. It's a fate most wouldn't wish on their worst enemies. Speaking of the North Korean families, Voice of America, or VOA, delivers a coda for the terrifying conditions under which the country's soldiers are forced to operate. It says that several North Koreans believe that the country's rulers may not be holding soldiers' family members hostage at all. Instead, North Korea may be keeping the fact that it's sending soldiers into Ukraine a complete secret from the country's population, including the family members of soldiers. Kim Jong-a, a defector who was a first lieutenant in the North Korean People's Army, says North Korean mothers who sent their children to Russia must feel unimaginable pain, and those mothers can't express their pain. They cannot even cry as hard as they want at home because there are no soundproof walls between houses. The terror for the North Korean soldiers deepens. Many won't even know if their families have been told where they've gone. They'll be trying to fight in Kursk, knowing that none of the money they've been paid is going to stay with them. All the while they'll fear that members of their families have been kidnapped to ensure they don't desert. Or, if VOA is right, they'll be kept up at night knowing that their loved ones don't even know where they've gone, and there's nobody to fight their corners back home. How could there be? The state will crack down on any of their family members who express even the slightest hints of anguish. That constant anguish and anxiety only adds to the fear instilled in them by the prospect of war. These are soldiers who are poorly trained, who have no experience of real-world fights, and have already seen some of their comrades killed by Ukrainian artillery. The situation isn't going to get any better for these soldiers. They'll either die within the rubble of Kursk or return to a home country that doesn't care for them. No wonder so many of the 11 to 12,000 just want to go back home. What would you do in this situation? Run and potentially put the lives of your family at risk? Or face the terror that awaits you in Kursk as you fight alongside a supposed ally that sees you as a hindrance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and thank you for watching the video.